How we doing out there, everybody? Here we are in our fifth week of our 1102 Comp Lit course. So as of you all seeing this video, your last reader responses are in the grade book, so you should have by now about at least 4 assignments worth of grades in the grade book. Your response, your essay, your analysis on either the yellow wallpaper or Young Goodman Brown. I'll start turning those back around to you this week. And this is the second week of our poetry unit. Last week we had the Maya Angelou poem, which is really her inaugural, the piece she wrote, I should say, for the inauguration of President Bill Clinton, who won the 92 nomination and was inaugurated in 93 in January. And she read that piece in commemoration of President Clinton's presidency, the beginning of his presidency. And that tradition, I believe, began when President Kennedy was inaugurated, who wrote and read the inaugural poem for President Kennedy? Well, a poet we're going to look at this week, Robert Frost. Okay, so Robert Frost, I believe, began that tradition. Maya Angelou continued it. There have been other poets, Richard Blanco, whom I actually saw read at Georgia Tech. He read the inaugural poem for President Obama's, I think it was his second term. And recently for President Biden, the junior poet, what was her name? Gorman, I believe is her last name. Young lady who read that poem a couple years ago. This is all to say that there's a tradition of poets reading during presidential inaugurations. And I actually left in the journal assignment this week where you guys have to comment on which poet, either Billy Collins or Maya Angelou, which poet in their poem, what poem style kind of resonated with you more and made it more comprehensible and understandable for you in appreciating that poem. Because remember that discussion we had, entitled "Why is Poetry?" kind of about the frustrations that a lot of people experience when confronted with a poem. Well, I want you guys to tell me, which poem were you frustrated least by? And maybe you weren't frustrated at all. Maybe it was a perfectly enjoyable reading experience for both poems. But which one for today's journal, or this week's journal, due Friday, which poem was more clearly communicated to you guys? Which poem's message was more successfully communicated to you, and which poem did you take something from, and maybe because of that will turn out to be more memorable for you? Okay, so that has to do with our journal for the week. Speaking of Robert Frost, our second slate of poems, one by Robert Frost, Acquainted with the Night, and then one by Emily Dickinson, Wild Nights, Wild Nights. Interesting thing about Emily Dickinson, one of the giants of American poetry, born in Amherst in the 19th century. She rarely, if ever, left the environs of her home, which is really her father's home in Amherst. She was kind of a shut-in, a recluse, very introverted, but she got to experience the world in a sense through her father's vast library at that home. So she had such a rich, fertile imagination that she was able to travel the world, so to speak, but within a room, within a home. So she's really interesting, Emily Dickinson. I'm sure you guys are familiar. I think there was a Apple Plus TV series, which of course takes a lot of liberties and kind of adds its own spice to make it more palatable for modern audiences. Apparently, these figures aren't interesting enough on their own merits. We have to gussy them up in some way. You might remember that Abraham Lincoln zombie or vampire hunter from several years ago. Apparently, Abraham Lincoln isn't interesting enough. We have to make him fight vampires. Okay. Apparently, Emily Dickinson isn't interesting enough. We have to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. But that's just me being a curmudgeon. Point being that she has had her own little pop culture moment just a few years ago on Apple TV Plus. So Emily Dickinson writes poems that are very compressed. You'll notice the lines are very short. Okay. She also uses a lot of dashes. I really like that punctuation mark, the dash. It kind of indicates that you're not quite finished saying what that you had meant to say. You're sort of your thoughts are going so quick that you have these diversions to other thoughts. That's what the dash indicates. Dash also indicates that there's more to be said after the dash. Dashes are kind of like parentheses, parentheticals, or commas in a way. So you'll notice that in Wild Nights. Robert Frost is, and both poets, by the way, from New England. Okay, Emily Dickinson comes first, and Frost a little later, but they were both born in the 19th century. Robert Frost, big nature poet, big poet about common, ordinary concerns of everyday life. Okay, mortality, old age, the passage of time, spiritual concerns as well. Emily Dickinson, also a poet about spiritual concerns, love and death, very big with her. So these two poets, probably more than Collins and Angelo, definitely have kind of a spiritual kinship in a way. So you might find a lot of commonality, either thematically or maybe stylistically, although they're not super comparable stylistically. Dickinson is very much her own sort of animal, to use an expression, when it comes to style. Again, those dashes. She uses also a lot of exclamation points. It might seem simple. The poems might seem simple at first, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface. If you can kind of penetrate through the figurative language and the clever enjambment and word construction of the lines and things like that. So, and also, I don't know if anyone's a classic rock fan, but there was a Simon and Garfunkel song. Simon and Garfunkel were a famous folk duo from the 60s and 70s. And in one of their songs, they mention Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost. This is all to say that these two poets are very, very, they loom very large in American letters. They're relatively short poems. Dickinson wrote, her poems are universally very short. The Frost poem isn't very long, not as short as the Dickinson poem. So this week, a reader response on those two poems due by Sunday, okay? And the same criteria as the previous week's poems, talking about, figurative language, style, all that stuff. I would recommend that you visit last week's announcement if you need a refresher on how to cite lines of poetry. If you cite multiple lines in a poem, and when you cite multiple lines, I wouldn't go more than 3 lines. Otherwise, you have to format it as a block quote. So to avoid that, just do upwards of 3 lines, or maybe just 1 or 2 lines. But in any case, if you do multiple lines, it's indicated with a slash, a forward. I think it's a forward slash. So just reference that former announcement from last week on formatting for poetry citation. And I think that's it. That is it. Yeah, we have the reader response on the 2 poems, Dickinson's poem and Frost's poem, on Sunday. And then the journal due Friday, which calls back to the previous week's poetry selections. So after this week, we will have a mini Shakespeare unit on Shakespeare sonnets, some of them, okay. And I know whenever there's a concentration on Shakespeare. It's typically one of his plays. We're going to do a different play at the end of the term, but I'll expose us to some of the sonnets. I think I have on the syllabus a return to some poetry after the little Shakespeare unit. We'll see where we are with time. We might get into our novella unit, which is Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. We'll kind of see how things play out. Just talking long-term, big picture here. A note on the quality of y'all's work. It's been really, really good on the whole. Everybody's getting, for the most part, A's on assignments. And don't get disheartened or discouraged if you don't get 100 on everything. So 100 means perfect, right? Now, perfect means, well, it means different things to different people. But, when I'm grading a written response of yours, things I look for are, when you're citing your sources, are you including that parenthetical citation for your textual evidence with the paragraph or page number in there with the author's last name? Are your paragraphs structured in such a way that it's readable, okay, and sensible, logically constructed? Are you actually answering the prompt? And everybody, for the most part, is doing all those things and doing a really, really good job. So I just want to applaud you guys on doing such a good job with those responses. It's really nice to see. Just to comment on the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the Holmes piece, and the Joseph Conrad story, The Idiots. A lot of people overwhelmingly enjoyed the Holmes mystery by Arthur Conan Doyle over Conrad's The Idiots, because they felt that, it's the Holmes one's a nicely paced mystery, and of course we all know Sherlock Holmes, right? So it kind of keeps us reading, wanting to solve the mystery. But a lot of people were kind of squeamish about the kind of dark tone of The Idiots, and I admit it is a little melodramatic with the husband and wife character, how they end up at the end. But don't think that the author was just having his way and making fun of people with disabilities. If that were the case, he would be a stupid author, okay? And we're not reading stupid people. If you're just like pointing your finger laughing at somebody because of their handicaps or disabilities or because they're not perfect, well, that makes you a pretty terrible person. So I don't take any pleasure out of exposing you guys to terrible people. Joseph Conrad was an interesting person. He was Polish, immigrated and got citizenship in the UK. Contemplating having us read Heart of Darkness. There's some interesting things we could talk about there, but I'm not sure. Anyway, my whole point being, I don't think he's calling the kids idiots. That would be a little too simplistic, right? I think the term idiots, the title, has kind of a double meaning or an ironic meaning, where it's actually the parents who are the idiots for their lack of acceptance and, of course, what they do to themselves at the end. So I just wanted to disabuse you of the notion that this is some mean-spirited writer who's just, getting a good laugh, poking fun at children with disabilities. That's a little too simplistic and silly, and it wouldn't be worth our time anyway. So I just wanted to let you guys know that. We did have a few people who actually preferred The Idiots over Scandal in Bohemia, which was nice to see. I gave you a kudos if you were in that minority. Not that it matters. Your tastes are your tastes. And you don't have to like either one. The purpose of this class isn't that you'll like everything or that you'll be comforted by everything or that, your worldview will be reaffirmed. College used to be, when I was in school, I went to school 2003 to 2007 for my undergraduate year. And college before that, the tradition of college higher learning is to challenge you, not to just kind of reaffirm or applaud your biases or, give you a slay queen or anything like that. It's supposed to be challenging and make you feel a little uncomfortable, maybe from time to time. So it looks like that's what happened with The Idiots for some of you. And that's okay. That should be fine. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Journal due on Friday and read a response due on Sunday. Doing a great job, guys. Keep it up. Peace. Talk to you again in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.